Lin Xiao dragged an old suitcase and stood at the door of an old apartment, looking up at the signboard that was so stormed by the wind and rain that it was almost impossible to see clearly. Happy Garden. This name sounds quite warm, but the appearance of this building is actually nothing to do with happiness. The wall spots seem to have skin disease. The glass on the window was broken and stuck in a row with a rubber band. There were still piles of smelly garbage under the building, and several wild cats were searching for something. He glanced at his eyebrows, feeling a little regretful, but the hundreds of dollars left in his pocket reminded him that he had no choice. Just that's it, I won't be able to live for long anyway, he said to himself, gritted his teeth and walked in. The light in the hall was dim and there was a musty smell in the air, as if I had not passed the wind for decades. In the corner, there was an old man wearing a ragged gray coat, full of facial patterns, his eyes half closed, as if he was asleep, and as if he could jump up at any time. There was a broken notebook on the table in front of him, which should be registered. "Hey, old boy, I'm a new tenant, named Lin Xiao." Lin Xiao knocked on the table and tried to attract the other party's attention. The old man opened his eyes quietly, his eyes as deep as a black hole, staring at Lin Xiao's heart. "Well, I'm here." The old man's voice seemed to be squeezing out of his throat. "How many rooms?" 1305. Lin Xiao took out a Navy rental contract from his pocket and passed it over. The old man took it, glanced at it, then wrote a few words on the broken notebook, muttering, 1305, okay, remember. "My name is Lao Chen, I am the doorman here, come to me if you have something to do." He gave the contract to Lin Xiao, and then reiterated, "But, I ran around in the middle of the night, and this building is not clean." Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment. He didn't know what this meant, but looking at old Chen's mysterious look, he didn't ask much, so he dragged his luggage to the elevator at the point of the head. There is a yellow notice posted at the entrance of the elevator door, which reads, "Be careful when you are repairing the elevator," and the words can hardly be seen clearly. He pressed the button and the elevator door squeaked and a scent of iron came over his nose. Lin Xiao hesitated for a moment and walked in. Anyway, climbing the 13th floor was not a good idea. The elevator was moving abnormally slowly, and all kinds of strange sounds were made, as if they were moaning. Lin Xiao looked at the phone with his head down, trying to distract himself, and the trusted number was displayed at 0, and there was no network in this ghost place. Finally, the elevator stopped with a ding sound and the door opened slowly. He looked up and found that the number showed 14, not the 13th level he was going to. "What's the matter?" Lin Xiao murmured and pressed the 13-layer button for a few times, but the elevator strips were not moving and the door was closed. He looked out and saw the corridor was empty and the lights were dim and yellow as if they were about to be extinguished at any time. There was still a strange smell in the air, as if something was rotting. He felt a little tired, but he also felt that he might be too tired and had a mistake. So he pressed the door key with his head and the elevator finally moved. This time the old man actually stopped at 13 levels. The door of 1305 was in the corridor, and the door was so damp that it was so hard that the key was inserted into it and it took a long time to open it. The situation in the room was worse than he thought. There was a large area of water in the corners of the wall, the floor was creaking, and a piece of rag was hanging around the window, which was hard to be considered a window. Lin Xiao sighed and threw his luggage on the ground, planning to sleep together for a night before packing up tomorrow. That night, he was lying on the hard bed, turning around and unable to sleep. The floor was quiet and could occasionally hear the sound of water dripping from the water pipe, or the sound of some unknown origin, as if someone was talking in a low voice. He closed his eyes and tried to relax himself, but his brain always remembered the words, "This building is not clean." What does it mean? Is it hard to tell if there is anything wrong with this place? In the middle of the night, he was suddenly awakened by a strange sound. The sound was like the squeak sound that came out when the elevator door was turned off, and it continued to pass from the corridor. Lin Xiao sat up, rubbed his eyes, looked at his cell phone, and the time showed that it was 1 o'clock in the morning. He felt a little regretful. Who is still using the elevator this late? Curiosity was exasperated, so he put on his slippers, walked to the door with his hands and looked out through the cat's eyes. There was no one in the sky above the corridor, and the light was still so dim, and the elevator doors far away were tightly closed without any silence. But the squeak sound became clearer and clearer, and you could even hear the sound of the rushing birds running on the elevator, as if it was moving up and down. Lin Xiao's heart beats faster and his palms are sweating. He told himself not to think too much. It might be that the elevator was old and he moved, but another voice shouted in his brain, "Who would use the elevator this midnight?" He hesitated for a moment, and the door was opened. The air in the corridor was colder than in the room, as if it could diamond into the bones. He slowly approached the elevator, and his footsteps were particularly harsh in the silence. When he walked to the elevator door, the sound suddenly stopped, as if it had never appeared. He pressed the button and the elevator door opened quietly, and there was no one inside. "I'm seeing the ghost," Lin Xiao said in a low voice, thinking that he might be too tight and had a phantom sound. He turned around and prepared to return to the room, but at this moment, the elevator door suddenly closed with a bang, and then the digital display began to jump wildly, from 1 to 15, and then from 15 to 1, as if it was damaged. Lin Xiao was scared to take a step back, and his heart almost jumped out of his throat. At this moment, he heard a slight sound of footsteps coming from behind, as if someone was slowly approaching. He turned around suddenly, not seeing anything, and there was still air in the corridor, only the lights that were swollen with the desire to be buried in the flash. He swallowed, feeling like someone was blowing his breath on his neck. "Who is there?" he shouted with a whisper, and the sound was replies in the corridor, but no one responded. He took a deep breath, told himself not to scare himself, and turned around and walked into the room. But just as he was about to reach the door, he heard a low sound from the next room, as if someone was talking or crying. Lin Xiao stopped walking, his ears pressed close to the wall, and tried to hear the picture clearly. The sound continued, like a woman's voice, carrying an indescribable sadness. He felt nervous and remembered that Fang Dong mentioned that there was a girl named Xiaoya living next door. She didn't usually have a lot of outings and had a weird personality. Could it be that she cried in the middle of the night? He hesitated for a moment, and still knocked on the door next door. "Hey, Xiaoya, are you? Is there anything wrong?" he asked lightly, but the sound behind the door suddenly stopped, as if it was being cut off. After a few seconds, a trembling woman voice came from behind, it's okay, you go back." Lin Xiao bent her eyebrows, thinking that this matter was not very good, but it was not easy to force others. She could only say call me if you have something to do and then went back to her room. That night, he never fell asleep again. His brain was filled with the strange sounds of the elevator and the low voices of the next door. He always felt that this building was a bit evil. The next morning, Lin Xiao lowered the building with 2 dark circles on his eyes, wanting to ask his boss Chen about the situation. But Chen was not in the hall, and he didn't see the broken notebook on the table. There were only a few flying nearby. He sighed and decided to go to work first and say it tonight. But throughout the day, his brain couldn't get over the strange things that happened last night. The sound of the elevator, the quarrels of numbers, and Xiaoya's strange reaction. I always feel that there is something unfavorable hidden here. During his lunch break, he couldn't help but search for Happy Garden online, and all the horror stories popped up, such as Big Ghost Building and Midnight Elevator, which made him feel furious. There was a post written in particular, saying that after the building was built in the 1960s, several strange deaths occurred in just a few years. Some people jumped off the building, some missed it, and there were even rumors that this place was once the activity site of a cult, and what kind of blood sacrifice was held. The building was abandoned later, and the rent was low, but not many people dared to live there. Those who lived there either moved out or something happened. Lin Xiao looked at these and felt more and more uneasy, but he felt that most of the things on the internet were compiled and could not believe them all. After get off work, he returned to the building and found that Chen was sitting in the hall again, still in the half-dead look. "Old Chen, did something really happen to this building before?" Lin Xiao asked, with an indeterminate point in his language. Old Chen looked up at him, and a strange smile came out of the corner of his mouth. young man, it's not good to ask too much. Some things are the less you know, the safer it is. He paused for a moment and then reiterated, especially the elevator, don't touch it in the middle of the night. Lin Xiao's heart skipped a beat and wanted to chase him, but old Chen had already ignored him, as if he didn't want to say more. He had no choice but to go upstairs, with his brain full of old Chen's words. What's wrong with the elevator? Why can't you touch it? That night, he turned off the light early and lay on the bed, deciding not to go out no matter what sound he heard. But in the middle of the night, the familiar squeak sound began to sound again, which was clearer than last night, and you could even hear the dink sound when the elevator stopped. He turned around and tried to put on the picture without hearing it, but the sound seemed to be deliberately picking it, and it was over and over again, as if someone was calling him over. Finally, he couldn't help it, so he sat up, put on his clothes, took his mobile phone as a flashlight, and decided to go and see what happened to the elevator. He walked to the door, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. The corridor was still so cold and the lights were so dark. He approached the elevator step by step, his heart beating like a drum. When he walked to the elevator door, the door was already open, and it was pitch black inside, like a bottomless pit. He picked up his cell phone and took a photo. He found that the walls in the elevator were covered with scratches, as if they were scratched with their fingernails, which made people's skin numb. What's even more strange is that the digital display is not showing any floor, but a blank space, as if it's damaged. Lin Xiao took a step back and felt that this matter was absolutely not simple. He was about to leave the door when he suddenly heard a low laugh from the depths of the elevator, like a woman, carrying a resentment that could not be said. His whole body stiffened and he turned around suddenly, but there was nothing behind him, only the darkness in the corridor seemed to be able to swallow everything. Who is inside? His voice was trembling, and the light of his mobile phone shone into the elevator, but nothing was seen. The laughter was getting closer and closer, as if it was coming from all directions. He could no longer hold it back and pressed the door key sharply, and the elevator door closed slowly. But just as the door was about to close, he glanced at a touch of red color, like a corner of a red dress, and he couldn't see it after flashing for a moment. Lin Xiao was so scared that his legs were soft. He climbed back to the room with a slept, locked up the door, and leaned against the door and gasped. My heart was full of red and the laughter, as if it was engraved into my brain. He told himself that he might have misread it, but he knew clearly that it was definitely not an illusion. From that day on, he began to pay attention to every detail in the building and try to figure out what secrets are hidden here. He would occasionally meet Xiaoya, but she always lowered her head and looked away, as if she was hiding something that could not be said. He also tried to ask Old Chen, but Old Chen always talked about him, saying don't worry too much to make him even more curious. Every midnight, the elevator sounds never stop. Sometimes it sounds like squeak, sometimes it sounds like a low voice, or even a knock on the door, as if someone is trying to enter. Lin Xiao knew that he had been ripped off this building, and he had to face everything whether he wanted it or not. One night a few days later, he finally made up his mind that he would go in and take a look no matter where the elevator led. He prepared a flashlight, took a fruit knife to defend himself, stood in front of the elevator door, waiting for midnight to arrive. At that time, the clock pointed to 12 points, and the elevator door was indeed opened by itself. The digital display was still blank, and it was as dark as if it was another world. Lin Xiao took a deep breath, held the flashlight tightly, and walked in. The door was closed behind him, and the elevator began to rise slowly, but this time, it did not stop at any level, but went straight up, as if it would never stop. He felt nervous and thought that he might have made a big mistake, but he couldn't regret it. The elevator finally stopped with a ding sound, and the door opened slowly. What caught my eye was a completely unfamiliar corridor. The walls were covered with Chen's blood, and there was a pungent smell in the air. Lin Xiao held the fruit knife tightly and told himself not to be afraid, but his steps were shaking involuntarily. He knew that this was definitely not any floor of the Fenggui building, but a place that should not exist. Far away, there seemed to be a shadow moving in the corridor. He was wearing a red dress, his long hair covered his face and slowly walked towards him. Lin Xiao's heartbeat almost stopped. He recognized the red color, which was the corner he saw in the elevator door that day. His intuition told him that this thing was definitely not human, but he had no way out and could only stand firm and prepare for everything that came next. Lin Xiao stood in the strange corridor. The air was as cold as if it could hold his breath, and the light of the flashlight shook in the darkness, barely illuminating the place far away. The blood on the wall looked like a trace that had been dry for many years, showing a strange dark red color, and the fishy smell in the air made his stomach swell. He held the fruit knife in his hand tightly. The handle was soaked in sweat, and his heartbeat sounded pounding around his ears, as if it was about to explode at any time. The red-clothed shadow was still moving as slowly in the corridor, as if he had not noticed his existence, but every step made Lin Xiao feel the pressure double. He swallowed, trying to calm himself down, his brain full of the red color. He glanced at the elevator door that day. He knew that this thing was not a human, it was definitely not a human. Who is there? His voice was trembling, and the light from the flashlight shone straight, but the shadow seemed to be unaffected by the light at all, and he slowly approached. The long hair covered its face, and I could only see a pair of white hands hanging from the side of my body, and my nails were astonishing as if they could easily tear something open. Lin Xiao took a step back, and when his feet touched the wall, a sound came out. The shadow suddenly stopped, as if he had heard the silence. He held his breath and silently recited, don't come, but the shadow raised his head suddenly. Although his face was still covered by his hair, Lin Xiao could feel a pair of eyes staring at him. The visual lines seemed to be able to penetrate his body, causing the hairs all over his body to swell. He clenched his teeth, put on the fruit knife, and shouted, don't come. I'm not afraid of you. As the voice fell, the shadow made a low smile, which was as sharp as it could pierce the eardrum, exactly the same as the laughter I heard in the elevator that day. Then, its body began to twist, as if it was being pulled by some force, and in the blink of an eye it moved from the corridor to less than 10 meters away from the forest. Lin Xiao was so scared that he almost threw the flashlight away and turned around and wanted to run away, but the elevator door behind him was already very accurate and the button was not reacting at all. Damn, I'm playing with me. He said in a low voice, turned around and saw that the red shadow had already stepped closer. A white face appeared in his hair, his eyes were as dark as 2 deep holes, and a strange smile came out from the corner of his mouth. Lin Xiao felt cold in his heart, and finally realized that this was the red girl in red that was passed on online, the red-clothed female ghost who often appeared on the elevator of the Fenggui building. He knew he couldn't escape, so he could only use his skin to face, so he put on the flashlight and tried to use a light line to force the other party to retreat. However, when the light line shone on Ah Hong, it seemed to be swallowed up and it didn't work at all. Ah Hong's smile became closer and closer, and the fishy smell in the air became more and more heavy. Lin Xiao felt that his legs were almost out of breath. At this moment, a rapid sound of footsteps suddenly came from the other end of the corridor, as if someone was running over. Lin Xiao was stunned. When he turned around, he saw nothing, but the sound of his steps became clearer and clearer, and he could even hear a heavy breathing sound. Ah Hong seemed to hear it, and turned her head to look in the direction of the sound. The smile on her face disappeared instantly, replaced by a kind of resentment that she couldn't speak. Who is there? Help me! Lin Xiao shouted, and the sound replied in the corridor, but his footsteps suddenly stopped, as if he had never appeared. Ah Hong's eyes returned to him, raised his hand slowly, and his nails flashed coldly in the darkness. Lin Xiao's heart sank, knowing that he might really be going to fall this time. But just as Ah Hong was about to sweep over, a faint light suddenly lit up in the corridor, like the light of another flashlight. Then, a familiar voice came, and the sound was deep and quiet. Young man, don't be stunned and run here. When Lin Xiao heard this sound, he seemed to have caught a life-saving straw. It was Lao Chen. Without thinking too much, he ran towards the light source. Although his legs were as soft as stepping on cotton, his instinct to survive made him use his breasts. Behind him, Ah Hong let out a sharp roar, as if she was extremely unwilling to accept it, and then caught up with her, with a speed that was too fast. "Old Chen, hurry up!" Lin Xiao ran and shouted, his voice almost breaking. He could feel the chill behind him getting closer and closer, and he could even hear the sound of clothes rubbing, like Ah Hong's fingers could touch his back at any time. Old Chen stood far away, holding an old flashlight, his face as heavy as a block of iron, and he was chanting something in his mouth. Lin Xiao couldn't hear it clearly, but the sound made him feel a little calmer. Finally, he ran to Old Chen and stopped panting. When he turned around, he saw that Ah Hong had stopped a few meters away, as if he was being held back by something invisible, staring at them with resentment. Old Chen snorted coldly, put on the flashlight, shook Ah Hong, and said in his mouth, "Go back, this is not your place." Ah Hong's face twisted for a moment, as if she was extremely unwilling to accept it, but in the end she slowly retreated and disappeared into the darkness of the corridor. Lin Xiao leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, and his heart was filled with the joy of life after the disaster. He turned to look at the old man and couldn't help asking, Why are you here? Where is this?" Old Chen glanced at him, his eyes still so deep and unpredictable. He snatched his head, "You shouldn't ask about some things. I just passed by and heard the silence and came to see. Let's go, this place is not safe, don't run away." After saying that, he turned around, as if he didn't plan to explain it more. Lin Xiao was full of doubts in his heart, but seeing the impatient appearance of Old Chen, he didn't dare to ask too much, so he could only follow him forward. The corridor seemed to be in the same direction. The walls on both sides were covered with blood and scratches. In some places, vague words could be seen, such as life help messages, which made him feel furious. After about 10 minutes of walking, Chen finally stopped, pointed to a broken door in front and said, "Go in, I can go back to your level here." Can you really go back?" Lin Xiao was a little suspicious. After all, this place was so strange. Who knew what it was after? Chen said unhappily, "If you don't believe it, don't go in. I don't care about you anyway." After saying that, he turned around and left, and the light of the flashlight disappeared into the darkness. Lin Xiao gritted his teeth and pushed the door open with his head. It was pitch black inside and he couldn't see anything clearly. He raised his flashlight and took a photo, and found that it turned out to be an elevator room, with an old elevator inside, and the door was half open, as if waiting for him. He felt a little nervous, but he had no choice but to walk in and press the 13-layer button. On the elevator door, a squeaking sound came out and then it began to descend. This time it stopped digits again and stopped at 13 levels. As soon as the door opened, Lin Xiao almost rolled out and returned to the familiar corridor. Although it was still so dark, it was at least not bloody or fishy, which made him feel like he was returning to the human world. He climbed back to 1305, locked up the door, leaned against the door and gasped heavily. His brain was full of just a few years of experience. The red-clothed female ghost Ah Hong, Chen's sudden appearance, and the strange corridor seemed to have been having a nightmare, but the cold sweat on the fruit knife in his hand reminded him that everything was true. That night, he never fell asleep again, staring at the door, fearing that the red-clothed shadow would suddenly appear. It was not until dawn that he relaxed a little and decided to go to Chen to ask him clearly. This old man must know something, otherwise how could it appear in that place and force Ah Hong back? But when he got off the floor, Chen was not in the hall, and the table was still so chaotic, as if no one had ever sat there. He was helpless and could only go to work first, but his brain was full of last night and he couldn't concentrate at all. During the lunch break, he couldn't help but search for information on the Mengui building again. This time he found an old post, which mentioned that there was a fire in this building a few decades ago, and several people were burned to death. Among them, a woman in red clothes said that she was locked in the room and burned to death. Lin Xiao looked at this description and felt cold in his heart, and Ah Hong's white face appeared in his brain. Can't she be that woman? Her resentment has been left here, so she has been stolen? But why did you come to him? He's just a new tenant and knows nothing. After get off work, he returned to the main building and found that Xiaoyao was standing in the corridor, leaning against the wall, lowering her head, as if waiting for someone. Lin Xiao moved in his heart and walked over to try and asked, "Hey, Xiaoya, what are you doing? Come to me if you have something to do." Xiaoya looked up at him, her eyes still so dodging, and her voice was so low that it was almost unsatisfactory. "It's okay. I just heard that your room was calm last night and a little worried." After she said this, her face turned paler, as if she was saying something she shouldn't say. Lin Xiao's heart skipped a beat. What was the silence of last night? Could it be that she also heard the sound of the elevator, or Ah Hong's smile? He tried. "What did you hear? Is this building a little uneven?" Xiaoya bit her lip, as if she was chanting whether to say anything, but finally she slammed her head. "It's nothing, don't think too much. I'll go back first." After saying that, she turned around and left, moving as fast as if she was running away. Lin Xiao looked at her back and felt more and more that the girl had a problem. She must know something, but why didn't she say it? Could she also have something to do with the secrets on this building? Or is she not a living person at all? As soon as this thought popped up, Lin Xiao was shocked by himself, but he felt that it was not completely impossible. That night, he didn't dare to touch the elevator anymore. He was actually staying in the room, but in the middle of the night, the squeak sound came back, as if he was deliberately picking it. Lin Xiao covered his ears and told himself to avoid it, but his brain was full of Ah Hong's faces, and Xiao Yan's hiding eyes. He knew that he had been stolen from this building and had to face it no matter how he hid. A few days later, he finally met Chen under the building again. This time he didn't say anything, and directly stole in the other party, and asked anxiously, "Old Chen, always tell me, what's going on in this building? What's the elevator? Who is that red-clothed woman? I almost died, don't you tell me?" Old Chen glanced at him, his eyes still so deep and unpredictable. After a long silence, he said in a low voice, "Young man, there are some things you can't know just by wanting to know. The elevator is a road that leads to places you shouldn't go. You are in good health, and you won't die the first time you go, but if you go again, no one will save you. Where is it? Why are there ghosts?" Lin Xiao chased after him, and his voice became louder. The old Chen slammed his head and said, "Don't touch the elevator again. Some doors will not be able to close when they are opened." After speaking, he turned around and left Lin Xiao standing alone, asking for advice from his heart. But Lin Xiao knew that he could not give up like this. He is not a light person, and since he has been brought in, he has to figure out what is going on. He decided to go to the elevator again. No matter how dangerous it was, he had to figure out why Ah Hong came to him and what secret was hidden in this building. So, that night, he stood in front of the elevator door again, with the flashlight and fruit knife in his hand, his heart beating fast as if it was about to explode. At that time, the clock pointed to 12 points, and the elevator door opened itself again, and it was still so dark inside, like a bottomless pit. He took a deep breath and walked in, closing behind him. This time, the elevator did not go up, but went down directly, as if it was walking into the ground. The digital display is still blank, the air is getting colder and colder, and you can even see your own gas. Lin Xiao held the fruit knife tightly and told himself not to be afraid no matter what he saw, but he was still unsure. The elevator finally stopped and the door opened. Outside was a completely different corridor. The walls were covered with burnt marks, and a heavy burnt smell was filled with the air. Lin Xiao felt nervous and remembered the fire that was mentioned online. Could it be that this was the place where Ah Hong died that year? He walked forward carefully, with debris and dust under his feet, and a slight sound was heard at every step. Afar, there seemed to be another red color, moving slowly, as if waiting for him for a long time. Lin Xiao gritted his teeth and knew that he could not hide this time. He had to face Ah Hong and figure out what she wanted. "Come on, I'm not afraid of you," he shouted, and the sound replied in the corridor, as if he was trying to hurt himself. The red-clothed shadow paused for a moment, then a low smile appeared, and walked towards him slowly, the chill in the air instantly aggravated. Lin Xiao held the tight knife and was ready to face the next confrontation. A thought suddenly flashed in his brain. Maybe Ah Hong didn't want to harm him, but wanted to tell him something? Lin Xiao stood in the scorched corridor, the dust under his feet squeaked by him, and the heavy burnt smell in the air made him almost breathless. The light of the flashlight shook in the darkness, illuminating the place where it was several steps away. The walls were covered with black marks, like scars left after being swallowed by the flames. He held the fruit knife in his hand tightly, his heart beat as fast as if it was about to explode, and his eyes were fixed on the red shadow that was moving slowly far away. Ah Hong. Her figure was still so strange, her long hair covered her face, and her red clothes seemed to be clotted from blood in the dark, approaching him, and every step seemed to step on the tip of his heart. Lin Xiao swallowed, and the thought of a moment passed in his brain. Maybe Ah Hong didn't want to harm him, but what was there to say? He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He shouted in a low voice, "What do you want to fuck? If you want to harm me, come on. I'm not afraid of you." As the voice fell, Ah Hong stopped and slightly turned his head, as if he had understood his words. Afterwards, she let out a low smile, and the sound was as sharp as if it could pierce the eardrum, but this time, Lin Xiao heard a different emotion, not a simple resentment, but a kind of tragedy that could not be said. He was stunned for a moment, and the fear in his heart actually diminished a little, replaced by an inexplicable curiosity. "You have anything you want to say, right?" Lin Xiao tried to ask. His voice was still a little shaking, but it was a little more stable. He put on the flashlight and tried to picture Ah Hong's face, but when the light shone through the past, her figure seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, so blurred that it was impossible to see the details. Ah Hong didn't answer, but just raised her hand slowly. Her nails were so scary, pointing to a broken iron door in the corridor. Lin Xiao looked in the direction of her finger. The iron door looked like something from 10 years ago. The surface was full of iron bars, and there were several broken chains between the door, as if they had been locked and killed by someone. He felt nervous and guessed that there might be something important behind this door. Maybe it was the secret Ah Hong wanted him to know. "Okay, I'll go and have a look." Lin Xiao gritted his teeth, held the fruit knife, and walked slowly towards the iron gate. Behind him, Ah Hong no longer approached, but just stood quietly, as if guarding something. Her silence made Lin Xiao's heart calm a little, but with every step he took, he could feel the air getting colder and colder, as if he could diamond into his bones. Before he arrived at the iron gate, he reached out and pushed it. The pattern of the door was not moving. Although the chain was broken, it was still solid. He looked down and saw a yellow paper stuffed under the door, as if it had been forced into it. He squatted down, pulled out carefully, and glanced at the flashlight, and found that it turned out to be an old photo, with the corners burning, but he could still see the content above clearly. In the photo, there is a young woman wearing a red dress, smiling softly and brightly. A man standing next to her, wearing an old-fashioned suit and folding her shoulders. The two looked like they were in love. Lin Xiao was shocked. Isn't this woman just Although she was full of face and was completely different from the current ghost, he realized that his eyes were full of tears at a glance, with an indescribable injury. "Is this your past?" Lin Xiao asked in a low voice and turned to Ah Hong. Her figure was still so vague, but this time, she slowly pulled a little, then pointed to the iron door, as if urging him to continue. He felt a sudden rush in his heart, and he knew something behind this. It might be the truth about the fire that year. He put the photo in his pocket, stood up, pried the chains with a fruit knife, and then paid a lot of air to break a piece of it, and the iron door finally opened a piece of paper. It was as dark as a bottomless pit, and there was a more intense burnt smell in the air, and there was an indescribable sense of pressure, as if something was waiting for him. Lin Xiao hesitated for a moment and turned to look at Ah Hong. She was still standing there, with a lot of expectation in her eyes. "Okay, let's go." He gritted his teeth and pushed the door open and walked in. The light from the flashlight shone in, and what caught my eye was a broken room. The walls were covered with burnt marks, and various debris were scattered on the ground, like the skeletons behind the burning of furniture. There is an old iron rack bed in the middle of the room, with a skeleton lying on it, and there are several burnt cloth strips on the bones, as if they have been slapped here. Lin Xiao's stomach swelled up and almost vomited. He forced himself to calm down, looked around carefully, and found a broken diary on the corner of the wall, with the cover curled, but it could still be turned on. He rolled up and turned on the first page, which wrote in crooked words, "My name is Hong Ying. They locked me here and said they wanted to complete the ritual with my blood. I don't want to die, save me." Lin Xiao was shocked, and the words he saw on the internet appeared in his brain: cults, blood sacrifices, fires. Can you tell me that all this is true? No, Hong Ying was one of the victims of that year. She was locked in this room and was burned to death, so the resentment remained in this building? He continued to flip, and recorded the last few days of Hong Ying's hope in the diary. She wrote about how she was deceived into this building, how she was swept up by those in black robes, how she heard them chanting strange mantras, saying that she wanted to use her life to awaken what power she wanted to use her life to wake up. These beasts! Lin Xiao cried in a low voice, his fingers clenched white. He finally understood that Hong came to him not to harm him, but to let him know the truth and make her story remembered. He turned to look at the door, and Hong was still standing there, with less resentment in his eyes, replaced by a deep feeling of fatigue. "Don't worry, I'll let everyone know about this," Lin Xiao said in a low voice, with a firm sound in his voice. He stuffed the diary into it and was about to leave, but at this moment, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped, as if someone had opened a cold window. Then, black liquid began to pour out from the wall, like ink, gathering slowly into a huge rune pattern, emitting a suffocating pressure. Lin Xiao felt nervous and his brain flashed with the power mentioned in his diary. Could it be that this is what those people wanted to wake up that year? It has not disappeared completely yet and is still sealed in this building? At this moment, Hong suddenly let out a sharp roar, hurried into the room, standing between him and the runes, as if trying to block something. What are you fucking? Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment, and then he saw Hong's body begin to twist, as if it was torn by some invisible force, and black marks appeared on the red shirt, as if it was corrupted. She turned her head and looked at him. Although her face was still covered by her hair, he could feel the anxiousness in that look, as if he was about to run away. Without thinking too much, he turned around and rushed out, but a dark red light suddenly appeared on the rune behind him, and the room began to shake violently, as if it was about to collapse at any time. Lin Xiao ran out of the iron gate with a scrambled wheel. As soon as he reached the corridor, he heard a huge gecko coming from behind, as if something had been broken. Then, a cold wind gushed out from the door, carrying a creepy low voice, as if countless people were talking at the same time. "Damn, what's this thing?" Lin Xiao was so scared that his legs were soft. When he turned around, he saw that Hong's figure was no longer visible. The iron gate was wrapped in a black air, as if it was swallowed by something. He knew that this was definitely not something he could deal with, and the only way was to run back to the elevator and leave this ghost place. He ran away, the light of the flashlight swayed in the darkness, and the dust under his feet was kicked all over the place. The dark air behind him seemed to be alive, and he caught up with him. His low voice became clearer and clearer, as if he was directly diamonding into his brain, making him feel pain. He gritted his teeth and told himself not to stop. Finally, he saw the elevator far away, and the door was still half open, as if waiting for him. He rushed in and pressed the 13-layer button suddenly, and the elevator door was closed. But just as the door was about to close, a black hand suddenly stretched out from the door, and the nail tips seemed to be able to tear the steel. Lin Xiao screamed in surprise and slashed hard with a fruit knife. His hand seemed to be burned by something, and suddenly shrank back, and then the elevator began to rise. The air in the elevator was still so cold, his sweat was flowing all over his face, and his heart was so fast that it was about to explode. The digital display finally shows the normal floor, from 1 to 13, rising slowly, as if it never stops. He leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. His brain was full of just life experiences: Hong Ying's diary, the strange runes, and Hong's last look. Finally, the elevator stopped with a ding sound, and the door opened slowly. Outside was the familiar 13-layer corridor. Although it was still so dark, there was at least no black or low voice. Lin Xiao almost pulled out. Back to 1305, locked the door, leaned against the door and gasped for a long time before he could come over the gods. He took out his diary, his fingers were still shaking, and his brain was full of stories about red ink. He knew that this was not finished. The force was still in the building, and it was said that it would break the seal at any time, but Ah Hong used the last force to help him, and said that it had disappeared completely. He had a heavy feeling that he could not speak in his heart. He decided that no matter what, he had to figure out this matter out and could not let the red ink die in vain. The next morning, he lowered the building with 2 dark circles on his eyes and found Lao Chen. He said anxiously, "Old Chen, I know the secret of this building. That year, a woman named Hong Ying was killed by a cult person. They still wanted to wake up some power. Now that thing is still in the building and will come out at any time. You have to tell me, what should I do?" Old Chen glanced at him, his eyes still so deep and unpredictable. After being silent for a long time, he said in a low voice, "Young man, you really shouldn't touch that elevator. Some things are not something you can control. That power, it's not something you can deal with." He paused for a moment, and then reiterated, "But, since you already know, you can't stay out of it. If you want to survive, you have to destroy the rune." "How can I destroy it? That thing is not something that humans can touch." Lin Xiao was so anxious that he almost jumped up. Old Chen snorted coldly, took out a broken cloth bag from under the table, and told him, "There is something in it that can help you suppress that breath, but there is only one chance. At midnight, go back to the room and smash the rune center. Don't ask why, just do as you do." Lin Xiao took the cloth bag, and there was a black stone inside. It felt like a guru, and there were a few yellow papers with talismans that he couldn't understand. He was full of doubts in his heart, but seeing the impatient appearance of Chen, he didn't dare to ask more. He could only click the head and prepare to go there again in the evening. That night, he stood in front of the elevator door, holding the cloth bag given by his old man, and his heart beat too fast. At that time, the clock pointed to 12 points, and the elevator door opened itself again, and it was still so dark inside, like a bottomless pit. He took a deep breath and walked in, closing behind him. This time, the elevator went straight down and stopped in the scorched corridor. The air is still so heavy, and the burnt smell is so pungent that it makes people feel excited. Lin Xiao held the tight cloth bag and walked carefully to the iron door. The door was still half open, as dark as if it was another world. He lifted the flashlight and shone it in, and found that the rune was still on the wall, emitting dark red light, as if it was alive, flowing slowly. He gritted his teeth, took out the black stone from the cloth, and smashed it hard at the rune center as Old Chen said. As soon as the stone touched the rune, a sharp sound of sharpness came out, as if something had been torn apart. Then the rune's light began to dim, and the dark air seemed to be sucked into the stone, and the vibration in the room also stopped. Lin Xiao gasped and watched the runes disappear, and finally felt relieved in his heart. But at this moment, he heard a low voice coming from behind, like Ah Hong's voice, with a sense of decomposition. He turned around and saw nothing, but only the empty corridor, as if there had never been any red-clothed shadows. He knew that Ah Hong might have really left, and her resentment dissipated with the destruction of the runes and finally got rest. He felt indescribable in his heart, both relaxed and a little lost, as if he had lost a friend who had not said a few words. The elevator actually sent him back to the 13th floor this time. He returned to the room and sat on the bed and was stunned. His brain was full of these few days of experience. Although the rune has been destroyed, the strange atmosphere in the Fenggui building has not dissipated, and there is still a sense of indescribable pressure in the air. He knew there were more secrets here that were not uncovered, but at least, he helped Hong Ying and prevented a possible disaster. A few days later, he finally made up his mind to move away. Although the rent here is cheap, it is not a place where people can stay. While packing his luggage, he passed by Old Chen's desk. The old man looked like he was still half dead. He glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Some doors, once they are opened, will never be closed. You go, but remember, don't come back." Lin Xiao clicked a little, and knew in his heart that some things could not be forgotten and could not be avoided. He dragged his luggage out of the building, and the sun shone on his body, but he couldn't completely relax the shadow in his heart. Far away, the fierce ghost building still stood there, like a silent monster, waiting for the next uninformed unlucky guy.